I have been raised as the future daughter-in-law of the Sterling family since I was a child. At 20, I married Henry. At 24, I gave birth to Lucas. Lucas is very much like Henry, always quiet and reserved, not particularly close to me. Every night, I would bring them a cup of warm milk before bed, but on this day, Henry accidentally knocked over his glass, and Lucas secretly poured his milk away. I suddenly felt weary. The moment I handed the divorce papers to Henry, he frowned, displeased, and asked, "Over something this small?" "Yes, over something this small. What about our son? What do you plan to do with Lucas?" Henry had regained his usual expressionless demeanor, asking me in a business-like tone. I sat across from him, like a guest at his negotiation table, and calmly said, "I will give up custody. The house in Eastwood will also be transferred to his name as compensation for child support. After all, this child bears the Sterling name. Compared to staying with me, he and Henry are more like a real family." Henry looked down at me, his eyes showing little emotion, as if he couldn't understand what I was making a fuss about. "Mia," he said softly, "if you're upset about the milk, I apologize. You know I was drunk last night. I didn't mean to treat you that way," he patiently explained, still convinced it was about the milk. Henry had come home very late from a business dinner the previous night. I had waited up half the night and was awakened by the cold air he brought in when he opened the door. I got up from the sofa and, seeing him take off his coat while holding his forehead in discomfort, immediately went to the kitchen to bring him the milk I had been keeping warm. In the past, while our marital affection wasn't deep, we at least maintained appearances, but last night, I couldn't help asking one more question. "Did you meet someone? The perfume scent on you seems familiar." Henry suddenly let go of the hand reaching for the milk. Caught off guard, the glass slipped from our touching fingertips and shattered on the floor amidst the warm light of the room, breaking the silence completely. Henry's expression turned cold, his entire aura radiating irritation. He looked at me with a stern face and warned, "Mia, you've overstepped. You don't need to wait for me at night anymore, and you don't need to prepare milk for me." And my son Lucas, after seeing what his father did, also secretly poured his milk away. When I found out, he stood at the door and apologized to me with the same lack of emotion. "I'm sorry, Mom. Dad didn't drink his, so I don't want to drink mine either." Probably, in the eyes of this father and son, such an insignificant little matter was something I should not, and could not, make such a big deal over. I didn't offer any further explanation. I signed the papers, and trusted a lawyer, and chose to end my marriage with Henry. Henry talked dispassionately about the division of assets. I didn't listen much, nor did I really care. I went back to the room to pack my things. He looked me over and said, "Mia, the legal process will take time. You don't need to move out in such a hurry. This house can stay with you too." I glanced at this man, still composed and aloof, and calmly replied with words he had once said to me. "It's better to be clean and decisive about things, to avoid dragging things out and leaving problems behind." Henry said nothing more. I never imagined packing could feel so overwhelming. The room was full of little things, each one arranged by my own hand over time. I scanned the room and finally decided to keep it simple. I just dragged my suitcase toward the door. Henry stopped me. "Where are you planning to go? To your parents' house? I'll have the driver take you." "No need," I refused, telling him. "Remember to have the housekeeper clear out my things tomorrow. I won't deal with them." It wasn't like their household lacked people to do things anyway. As I stepped out the door, I thought for a moment. I turned back and addressed Lucas, who stood behind Henry with his usual impassive face. "I won't be picking you up from kindergarten anymore. But remember not to go with strangers. Consider it my final act of closure." After saying that, I turned and left, without another glance at the child who, during weaning, had cried and fussed, whom I had held in my arms night after night, patiently soothing. I bought a one-way ticket out of North Bay City. I randomly chose a city in the South, Southvale, from the age of 14, when I was told I would marry into the Sterling family. My freedom and choices were restricted. Later, after marrying Henry, except for necessary social events, he never took the initiative to suggest going out anywhere with me. The most common part of life was probably me waiting for the father and son to come home each night and bringing them a cup of warm milk before bed. In our social circle, everyone said Mrs. Sterling had trained me well, the perfect wife tailor-made for Henry, worthy of his status, capable of managing his life. The only flaw was too perfect, so perfect it was somewhat boring, even rigid. I once heard Henry's friends tease him, "Sterling, what's it like to live the old married couple life so young? Your wife is so dull, smiling like she's made of plastic. Want us to introduce you to someone more fun?" Just the other day, Liam met this hilarious girl, super funny, just like Vivian back in the day. Interested? Vivian, Henry's first love. Back then, Mrs. Sterling didn't approve of them being together, and Henry resisted fiercely. Then, somehow, they broke up, and Vivian went to the US. After that, when I was 20, Henry suddenly accepted his family's arrangement and proactively proposed to me. 4 years later, I had Lucas. Oh, right, now I remember. The familiar perfume scent I smelled that night was the custom gardenia scent Vivian used to love. After settling in Southvale, I explored many places. The gentle southern rain, the misty alleys. Everything delighted me. Unexpectedly, on the third morning, I received a call from Henry. He seemed to have just woken up, his voice hoarse as he asked, "Mia, where did you put those ruby cufflinks you bought me at last year's auction?" I paused, in the second drawer of the dressing room cabinet, then asked him, "What's the occasion?" Henry, "A mall ribbon cutting ceremony." Me, "The matching suit is the fourth one in the second row." Henry still seemed groggy. I could hear rustling sounds from his end of the phone, and faintly, his muttering. After listening for a moment, I asked, "Found it?" Silence on the other end, as if it finally clicked. "Found it, sorry. Didn't mean to trouble you," I said and replied, "I know." I instructed him, "Have the housekeeper reorganize the house for you. If you can't find things, you can ask them. From now on, please don't call and trouble me anymore." Henry was silent for a second, then said, "Okay." After hanging up, I blocked his number and went back to sleep, but I couldn't sleep soundly. I had many bizarre dreams, of laughing and playing with classmates at 14, of the sunny day I first met Henry at 15, of the pain at 16 when my dad caught me sneaking out to go street racing and broke my leg, and then, another jarring ringtone. I jolted awake from the dream, irritably grabbing the phone from the nightstand. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a polite voice inquired, "Hello? Is this Lucas's mother?" "I'm Lucas's kindergarten teacher. We're having a robot showcase at school today, and Lucas participated. But he didn't bring his project, saying his mother you prepared it. Would you be able to bring it for him?" The teacher was very warm toward me. My fingers tightened around the phone. I closed my eyes, feeling an indescribable weariness. Not long ago, I was sitting in the living room, head bowed, learning from video tutorials frame by frame, making Lucas's craft project. I just left too quickly. The robot was only half finished. Looking at the already high sun outside the window, I softly replied to the teacher, "I'm sorry, teacher, Lucas's custody is no longer with me, and I won't be involved anymore." "And is he with you right now?" "Ah." The teacher sounded quite awkward. Yes, Lucas is right here next to me." I sighed. "Could you please put me on speakerphone?" "Okay, sure. Thank you." There was rustling noise from the other end, then silence. I thought Lucas could hear me. I spoke softly, "Lucas? The robot is in the toy box in your room. You can call your dad to bring it, or anyone else. But from now on, I hope you won't call me anymore. I won't pick you up, and I won't help you with crafts, you know. I'm not your mother anymore." After saying that, I apologized to the teacher again and hung up. Saying such words to the child I brought into the world at great cost was inevitably heartbreaking. I can't remember when Lucas started becoming more and more like Henry. My engagement to Henry was arranged very early, from the time I was 14. When my grandfather and father came out of the study smiling with Henry's elders, I was groomed to be the sterling daughter-in-law. In school, many classmates envied my good family background. I didn't argue. I could only smile bitterly. My life was comfortable, but I had no freedom. When I didn't do well on the high school entrance exam, my mother, lying awake at midnight, grew angrier, thinking I had embarrassed her. She stormed into my room, pulled me up, and slapped me across the face. In high school, I rebelled and had a puppy love. My father supplied the other cheek, warning me that if I didn't want to marry into the Sterling family, my only other options were other businessmen. Nearly 20 years my senior, I first met Henry when I was 15, arranged by both families. Henry was different back then, a smiling teenager who wore his emotions on his sleeve. My impression of him wasn't deep. I just remember a white shirt against a blue sky, and eyes full of feeling. Later, I heard he was clashing with his family over his first love. I admired and envied him. At least he dared to resist. He had the right to refuse, But not long after, Mrs. Sterling came to visit my home. Wearing a proper, apologetic smile, she took my mother's hand and assured her, "Don't worry, in-laws, Henry's little issue has been resolved." Listening from behind the door, I felt deeply disappointed. I thought, of course, after that, the families kept arranging meetings between Henry and me. He was resistant at first, often giving me the cold shoulder later. He gradually accepted, occasionally speaking a few words to me. I also watched as he transformed from a prickly teenager into a silent, reserved young man, reigning in all his expressions. And the custom gardenia scent on him faded away with time. Then, when I was 20 and Henry 24, on our way to a banquet in Cedar City, we were caught in a landslide, trapped in the car. Henry and I were buried for a day and night. My last memory before rescue was his arm, shielding me from above, pierced by the crushed car frame, bloody and mangled. After waking up, he proposed, in front of members of both families. He asked me, "Mia, would you be willing to become my wife?" Back then, looking at his arm wrapped in white bandages, remembering when we were trapped, him anxiously calling my name, saying, "Mia, don't fall asleep. If you sleep now, you'll really have no freedom." I placed my hand in his, almost as if bewitched, and so I missed the look in his downcast eyes, calm and unfeeling, as if performing a necessary ritual. So we married. 4 years later, as everyone wished, we had a child. Lucas was doted on by both families from the moment he was born. Mrs. Sterling believed he needed the most elite education, just like Henry. So he poured out that glass of milk, just like his father, using his innocent face to apologize while doing what he thought was natural right. I don't know what this father and son were thinking. Within a week, Henry called me again. He used a different number because I had blocked him, dragging things out that didn't seem like something Henry would do. After the call connected, there was silence for a few seconds. Just as I was feeling baffled and about to hang up, Henry's voice came through. "Mia," he said my name, "your parents said you didn't go home. Where did you go?" "Southvale." He tracked me down. I knew he had that capability, but I felt an unspeakable anger. In our 9-year marriage, he was cold, distant, like a passing guest sharing the same roof. Now, in just half a month, the number of times H called me exceeded his total calls over the past year. In the past, when I texted him, "Are you coming home for dinner tonight? Are you in a meeting? Is your stomach hurting? Should I make some porridge and bring it over?" H'd reply at most with, The rest was just a screen of green from my messages. Now he acted as if nothing had happened. On the phone, his voice raspy, he asked, "Mia, I had business drinks today. My stomach's a bit upset. Where did you keep the medicine at home?" And Lucas caught a cold from a classmate at kindergarten. His fever is 38.5°C, and he keeps complaining he feels awful. What did you usually do to make him feel better? I was furious. I tried hard to suppress my anger, to not sound like a hysterical madwoman, and said to him word by word, "Henry, we are divorced. I am no longer your wife, nor your nanny. Whether your stomach hurts, whether you find the medicine, is none of my business. And with a single word from you, there's no shortage of people to buy you medicine. If the child is sick, telling me all this is useless. I'm not a doctor, and I've never seen a father who, at a time like this, still asks the child's mother what to do. I don't know what you're trying to achieve. Maybe it's reluctance. Maybe you're just used to my care. But Henry, I don't want to put this harshly. It's over. Don't disturb my life anymore. Do you understand?" After saying this, I hung up the phone for good. I flipped the phone over, took out the SIM card, and threw it in the trash. In today's society, everything is tied to your phone number. I hadn't expected Henry and Lucas to call me off and on. Naturally, I didn't think Henry had lingering feelings. It was just that they had gotten used to my care and were having a hard time adjusting. I got a new SIM card, withdrew some cash, signed up as a tag along with a scientific expedition team, and went to the frontier with them. It was a program I'd seen online when I mentioned it before. Henry said he had no time. Friends in our circle laughed and said, "That's so shabby, Mia, for someone of Sterling's status. Such a cheap tour group would be so embarrassing." I just smiled and said nothing more. At the time, I thought it was just a passing fancy. The Sterling family would never allow me to be so reckless. I never imagined it would be so easy now. Breaking a shackle requires the person bound to struggle from deep within. The day we set off with the expedition team, the sky was clear. We traveled by train. The whole journey rocked and swayed. Each time I sank into that troubled dream, the gentle rocking would slowly wake me. Dawn breaking, confusion lifting, The expedition followed the Crimson Canyon Loop, starting from Westmount to Emerald Lake, passing Salt Flats, stopping at Great Little Oasis and Windblown Valley. Desert Grotto rose from the sands, Crescent Spring quiet under the night sky, passing through Dunhuang Town, walking Heroes Pass, countless painted hills along the way. The expedition team was mostly geologists. They seemed inarticulate at first, but could talk endlessly about a pile of dirt, a blade of grass, an unknown wildflower, sometimes humorous, sometimes witty, making the vast, sparsely populated frontier feel full of rugged vitality. Admittedly, my privileged upbringing and the years of sterling grooming exposed me to many things others couldn't access. In my past understanding, I thought traveling like this would be more fun with family, but now, hiking the Yardang formations, camping in the desert, burnt mutton, covered in dust, showed me stars even brighter in the sky. I knew Henry could still track my travels, but it didn't matter anymore. Later, after the frontier loop ended, I exchanged contacts with these new friends. After resting in the city for a few days, we set off on the Alpine route. Reaching the summit of Snowcap Peak, I suffered severe altitude sickness, breathing rapidly, headache splitting. I almost thought I would die on this highest peak, but in the distance, the sun lit the golden mountain, and everyone atop the peak was cheering. Amidst this passionate, chaotic atmosphere, I burst into loud sobs. The team fussed around, giving me oxygen, sugary drinks, thinking I was just in terrible discomfort. They hurriedly comforted me. "Oh dear, don't cry. It's okay. Your blood oxygen is coming up. Don't be scared. We're here. You won't die. Yeah, kiddo, you're so young. You'll be fine for sure. You've got a long road ahead. This is nothing." I cried uncontrollably, finally laughed through my tears, amused by Jack's distinct accent. With their help, I stood up from the snow, facing the distant sunlit golden peaks, facing my rebirth. No matter how many shackles, no matter how difficult the path, I could reach the summit alone too, couldn't I? After returning, I rediscovered some of my old hobbies, like extreme sports, like street racing, like getting a little dog I love. Before my engagement to Henry, I was actually a laid-back and lively person, in love with all things vibrant and full of life. But later, I didn't even have my own freedom. How could I talk about passion? I got a mixed-breed Maltese. I named him an Ann. He has caramel-colored, soft fur, and innocent big eyes. When he runs, his ears flap, like a little tank. Dogs are easier to get along with than people. Dogs understand your needs better than people. Dogs never neglect you. Dogs know you love them, and they love you back. And the next time I saw Henry was at the entrance to my new home. I was about to take him in for a walk. Opening the door, I saw Henry standing by the elevator. Beside him, holding his hand, was Lucas, staring intently and nervously at an Ann in my arms. "What are you doing here?" I sat across from Henry, asking coldly. Lucas crouched at the far end of the sofa, frowning at an Ann, who was happily devouring his food. Henry silently looked me over for a moment. "Mia, you've lost weight." I raised an eyebrow. "Don't change the subject. It's our son. He wanted to see you." I couldn't stop him. "Henry," I asked him, "do you remember what I told you last time? We're divorced. Please don't disturb my life. Don't you understand?" Henry's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mia, Lucas is still young. He needs his mother." I laughed, called the building security, and had this father and son escorted out. Lucas refused to leave. He stood stubbornly in my entryway, looking at me, opening his mouth as if to say something, holding an Ann. I didn't glance at him. I firmly closed the door. I was afraid if I looked at him one more time, it'd instinctively soften. He was the flesh and blood I brought into this world. Lying on the operating table in excruciating pain, I held him, loved him, soothed him, cherished him. The first word he spoke was "Mama." Little Lucas used to cry around everyone, only quiet and sweet in my arms. But later, Mrs. Sterling said I wasn't raising the child well, using so-called elite education to groom him. A child's growth is always shaped and reflected by their upbringing. Whoever tells him something, he remembers it and acts accordingly. As he grew older, he became less willing to be close to me. He began to distance himself, treating me with formality, just like Henry. He would call me Mom. "Use you, Mom. Could you let Dad teach me instead? Grandma says your education isn't as high as Dad's. You can't teach me well, Mom. Why are you always at home? Don't you have any hobbies? My classmates' moms all do." "Mom, you're too serious. Not like Annie Vivian, who always has fun and interesting ideas." After telling the guards not to let them in, Henry changed tactics. Sometimes he waited for me alone at the main gate in the morning, sitting in the back of the Maybach, looking like he hadn't slept all night. Seeing me come out, H hastily hand me a steaming breakfast. You don't like eating in the morning. It's bad for your stomach. Have a little at least. Sometimes H'd bring Lucas, trailing behind me while I walked the dog. I walked past them without a sideways glance, never looking their way. Neighbors I met while walking the dog sometimes asked curiously about the relationship between this striking father-son pair and me. I told them truthfully, an ex-husband who's hung up on someone else, and a child who prefers that other woman. They immediately became awkward, then quickly rallied to my side. Every time they saw the father and son, they'd warn me ahead of time so I could avoid going out of sight, out of mind. I'd smile gratefully, tell them it's okay. I stopped caring long ago. Henry was always busy. Lots of things at the company needed him. He couldn't keep bothering me here forever. Many times, I saw him sitting wearily in the car, taking call after call, maybe from the company, maybe from the Sterling family. After all, H been keeping Lucas away from home for too long. Sometimes Lucas would sneak out behind Henry's back, have the driver bring him to find me, then, without a word, H take little steps, following closely behind me. I focused on walking in Anne, giving him water, coaxing him with treats, and would wag his little tail happily, barking softly at me. Lucas would just watch from the side, not speaking, his eyes full of anger. Children aren't as good as adults at hiding emotions. Once, Anne ran too fast. Lucas couldn't keep up, and he stumbled and fell on the stone path. Finally, he couldn't hold back, bursting into tears. His eyes red as he looked at me pitifully and said, "Mom, it hurts." Lucas rarely cried once he was old enough to understand things, probably feeling wronged and upset. Extremely miserable, he lay on the ground crying his heart out, looking at me. I watched him calmly, not moving, until the bodyguards following him rushed over and picked him up from the ground. In the past, Lucas often got sick. Every time he was listless, I'd feel distressed and heartbroken alongside him. But now, my heart was like still water, not a ripple stirred. My life now wouldn't be affected by the appearance of the Sterling father and son. After returning from my trip, I signed up for a racing club, thinking I'd pick up some old hobbies. Unexpectedly, I made it through the selection for a racing event. Even though I'd likely be eliminated in the first round, I prepared seriously for a long time. The race was set for a week later. The day I left, I deliberately bought a flight for the early morning hours, nervous pre-race preparations, expectant yet calm. The wind on the track tore through the blazing sun. Time stood still in the friction of tires against asphalt. Sweat under the racing suit, intense pursuit and tugs, taking off my helmet, sweat on my face, standing on the podium as cheers rose wave after wave from the stands. Second place, a result I never imagined. As I walked out with the crowd after the event, Henry stood in the packed crowd, holding Lucas's hand. Lucas held a bouquet of flowers in his arms, as if afraid the flowers would get damaged. He warily avoided everyone passing by. The moment he saw me, Henry nodded at me, a hint of a smile in his eyes, mouthing two words. From the shape of his lips, it looked like congratulations. Lucas, face flushed with excitement, waved at me vigorously, shouting brightly, "Mom, you're amazing." The surrounding crowd looked at us with knowing smiles. I just felt bored. Carrying my things, I walked out. Henry approached with Lucas. "Mia, I never knew you could do this. Why didn't you mention it before?" "Mom, you were so cool just now. You have no idea how nervous I was when you passed that car in front." I acted as if I hadn't heard, kept walking, but Henry grabbed my hand, lowering his posture, asking softly, "Mia, let's have dinner together tonight to celebrate. Lucas misses you a lot." Hearing this, Lucas quickly looked at me with anticipated eyes, trying to push the bouquet into my hands. I pulled my hand back, avoiding it. "I'm busy, no time. You two have fun." Henry became lax with work. Lucas stayed away from home too long. Mrs. Sterling inevitably sought me out. Looking at this woman who once chose me, yet with whom I had a rift, I felt an indescribable sadness. Maybe as fellow mothers, maybe as fellow women. "Mia, I chose you back then because you were quiet and reserved, suitable to be a Sterling wife. But now, both Henry and Lucas are staying away from home because of you. How is this any different from Vivian back then? Mia, come back as a favor to me. Give Henry another chance. Mrs. Sterling was never the type of wealthy matriarch who was pushy or aggressive. On the contrary, she always spoke gently and politely, just like Henry and Lucas treated me, if not for her son and grandson. She wouldn't lower herself to sit in my small 2-bedroom apartment, begging me to give Henry a chance. But Auntie, Henry doesn't love me. Our 9-year marriage has been years wasted for me. You chose me back then for my family, not for me. Now I've fulfilled everyone's wishes. Our families cooperate closely, inseparable. I had the child you wished for. Lucas is grown now. The Sterling family will take good care of him without me. Could you please give me back my freedom? My dad once broke my leg, killed the puppy I was raising. I was timid and weak, didn't dare resist later. I married Henry. Their goal achieved. And we had Lucas, bound by blood. I was no longer of any use. Most importantly, Auntie, I don't love Henry anymore. Young infatuation began with, Mia, if you fall asleep now, you'll have no freedom left. Will you marry me? Perhaps I can give you freedom. But later, the dragon-slaying youth became the dragon himself, forgetting the promise he casually made. Ah, Mrs. Sterling sighed deeply, speaking to the air. Did you hear that, Henry? I've tried my best. Beside her handbag, her phone screen was lit. It showed Henry's name. The call was connected. That night, Henry appeared at my doorstep. Mia, I still want to try. I know I didn't treat you well before, that I neglected you. Can you give me a chance to make it up, to start over? I looked at him calmly. I think I've made myself clear enough. Henry slumped, running a hand through his somewhat disheveled hair. He always cared about his appearance. This kind of embarrassment was rare for him. He wore an iron gray suit but with a pair of blue cufflinks. The color contrast was too stark. A big fox paws, in the past. Every outfit of his was coordinated by my own hand. Now, I just wanted him to leave. Henry looked at me wretchedly. I do love you, Mia. It's just that before, I didn't cherish it. I've never loved anyone. I didn't know how to love, so I made you sad and hurt. Only after you left did I realize I can't live without you. It's all my fault, Mia. Can you give me one chance? And Lucas needs you too. He cries every day for his mother. No one else can calm him except you. Can't you put aside your stubbornness for our son's sake? Oh, he says he loves me, says he's never loved, doesn't know how. Back when our families arranged our meetings, he told me, Mia, you know there's someone in my heart, right? Back then, he was clashing with the Sterling family over Vivian. Later, after we married, hearing Vivian had a new boyfriend in the US, he came home drunk late for the first time. The next day, Mrs. Sterling pressured us about having children, and Henry sneered, saying if she changed my perfume to the custom gardenia scent, H-degree, every instance, every time, there was someone else's shadow, and he says he's never loved. I looked at him with a sneer. What about Vivian? Henry was taken aback, as if finally exposed in a lie, then lowered his gaze and said seriously, there is no Vivian, Mia. There never was any Vivian. I was just unwilling to follow the family arrangement back then. I made it up. I've only loved you, from start to finish. How ridiculous. I used to wonder if Henry's neglect, his emotional coldness toward me, was because he resented me over the Vivian situation. I know the taste of powerlessness, but I didn't pity him. Later, after Lucas was born, my feelings for Henry gradually faded. I just went through the motions, habitually doing things befitting a Sterling daughter-in-law. I placed my hopes in Lucas, looking forward to finally having someone connected to me by blood in this household. In those early days, Lucas was my only comfort. Yet, in just 2 years, that hope also became a thorn piercing my flesh. Perhaps Henry did love me, but compared to his pride, his dignity, and other things, he was just used to my care and attentiveness. In our marriage, regardless of the reasons, his neglect, his emotional coldness, his unquestioned assumption that women should sacrifice for the family, these were unchangeable facts. No one is incapable of learning to love. No one doesn't understand love. Cherishing something only after losing it is just reluctance and not having found something better. When you're young, falling in love with anything is understandable. When you're mature, letting go of anything is not wrong. Henry, save yourself some dignity. Henry was always a proud man. He understood my words, so the last time I saw him was still at my place. Recently, it joined another tour group to Sunny Valley. Summer had lots of rain. I got caught in a few downpours, coupled with recent stress. I inevitably fell sick after returning, waking from the darkness, feeling utterly miserable. It was Henry who helped me sit up. Lucas crouched by the bed, worriedly asking in a small voice, "Mom, how are you? Are you feeling unwell anywhere? Can Dad and I take you to the hospital?" Henry propped a pillow behind me, telling me, "I saw you swaying when you came back last night at the gate. Thought something was off. Followed you upstairs and found you had fainted from fever at the door. I had someone give you a fever-reducing shot. How do you feel now? Still unwell?" he asked softly, carefully handing me something. A glass, milky white liquid. A cup of warm milk. "You didn't eat much tonight. Have some milk to warm your stomach." "Mia," he called my name softly, his tone familiar, starting to scold me. "You can't take care of yourself alone if Lucas and I weren't here today. You could have been seriously ill with no one knowing, Mia. Come home with us, okay? Let Lucas and me take care of you." Looking at him, speaking these with discomfort, and Lucas beside the bed, nodding vigorously in agreement, I smiled, reached out, took the glass of milk. The next second, let go. The glass slipped from my fingertips. With a crash, it shattered into pieces on the floor. White milk spread across the floorboards. Pointing at the mottled stain, I said slowly, "Henry, look, a shattered glass can't be made whole. Spilled milk can't be gathered back up, and besides." Within minutes, my door was abruptly knocked on, voices clamoring outside. Lucas went to open it. A crowd of people poured in, noisy and bustling. Each carried bags full of stuff, surrounding my bedside. "Hey girl, how'd you get sick? I told you not to get caught in the rain that day. But these folks just had to take you into the rainforest." "Sis, still feeling bad? I brought those soft candies you said you liked last time. If the medicine's bitter later, have one, guaranteed to help." Everyone chattered at once, finally noticing the two in the room. Hesitantly, they asked, "And these two are?" I saw Henry and Lucas instinctively tense up. Then, surrounded by the crowd, I smiled and introduced them across the room. "Not important. A friend and his son. We won't be meeting again. They'll be leaving soon, after all. He was just a child." Lucas instantly broke down, wailing at the door, crying, "I don't want to go. I want my mom." So loud it made an embark at him a few times. Sterling family staff immediately emerged from their discreet posts, picked up the crying child, and helped the stumbling man away. I too once crossed the river in the same boat. But spilled water cannot be gathered. The river sea offers no rest. Epilogue. The year Lucas turned 12, he finally gathered the courage for a father-son confrontation with Henry. He said he wanted to go find Mia. He didn't understand why Henry kept stopping him from doing something so simple and easy. Lucas didn't know that over the years, Henry had actually gone to see Mia. The reason he wouldn't let Lucas go was because Mia had remarried and had a lovely little girl. Henry thought his marriage with Mia had been too much of a failure. Mia was sensitive, prone to melancholy. To truly move on would take quite some time. But Henry never imagined Mia wasn't at all how he thought. She had even become someone unfamiliar to Henry, laughing freely, living boldly, as if that was her true self all along. Henry suddenly remembered the first time he saw Mia, a silent, quiet girl, pulled by her mother to sit across from him. Back then, Henry was tightly controlled by Mrs. Sterling. Hearing about the arranged marriage, he was furious. He naturally disliked this girl for years, his junior, who seemed so dull. For years, he fought fiercely with his family. Eventually, even his grandfather intervened. Reluctantly, Henry agreed to break up with Vivian. Vivian was his university classmate. Straightforward, she agreed without a second thought to help him with this charade. Henry didn't know Vivian had feelings for him back then, only felt guilty later. After Vivian returned, he had a few meals with her, discussed some collaborative projects. Henry originally thought such gestures would make Mia forgive him. At least he hadn't truly betrayed Mia. He always believed his mistake was taking out the resentment he felt toward the Sterling family's control on Mia being cold, indifferent. That made Mia's heart grow cold, until she couldn't bear it anymore and divorced him. It wasn't until Henry saw Mia's life after marriage that he realized what he had truly missed. Mia married a police officer she met during a chance roadside rescue. The officer's work was busy, but he always found time to take Mia out, to see mountains, to see the sea, to seek out the sources of all life. The officer told Mia about his schedule and work as soon as possible. Anything interesting or novel he saw on his way home, he'd buy or photograph and send to Mia. They shared their lives. They loved each other equally. Soon after, Mia had a daughter. As a toddler, the girl loved holding the Maltese and Anne, running outside later. When the girl grew a bit older, In kindergarten, Shed boasts boldly to her little friends every day. My mom is so amazing. She makes crafts, and she races cars. Do you want to come to my house? I'll introduce you to my mom. Henry was like a lurking shadow, peering this other family's life. Sometimes he wanted to step forward, greet Mia, ask if she was doing well, eating all right, but in the end, H silently retract his step. After that, he never inquired about Mia's life again. One lunar New Year's Eve, after business dinners, Henry returned alone to the empty house. He loosened his tie, feeling unwell, and called out, "Mia, I'm thirsty." He expected to be greeted by a warm light, a cup of warm milk. But all that answered was boundless darkness and silence. In that moment, overwhelming regret crushed Henry, leaving him breathless. His tall frame slowly slid down against the entryway wall. In the darkness came the sound of his agonized grief.